We have with us today the legendary Mr. Mathis Wackernagel from San Francisco. Mathis, sir, is a co-creator from the Ecological Footprint and president of Global Footprint Network, recipient of World Sustainability Award in 2018 and Planet in 2013, and many, many more. Welcome, sir, and thank you for taking your time for Act Now and the Peace is Green event. We've had a lovely conversation last year, and I hope to continue it. Sir, the first question is a very dicey yet simple question that in about 4 decades, Earth Overshoot Day has only indicated that all of the progress is hollow. We have moved back almost 3 months. Is there any hope for future? And if there is, do you think there has been any change?
Of course, we could have a fantastic future. The question is whether we want to choose it. So we measure just every year how much humanity uses compared to how much Earth can renew. So last year in 2020, between January 1st and August 22nd, we used as much as Earth can renew. And that was later than in 2019 because of COVID. The economy slowed down, we didn't consume as much, resource consumption went down. And so particularly in the first part of 2020, it went down quite a bit. So in 2019, Earth Overshoot Day was on July 29th. And this year in 2021, it's kind of a tough story that even though we had COVID and we suffered so much and people couldn't do everything they wanted to do, and we had human suffering as well, at the same time, resource consumption went up again. And now in 2021, Earth Overshoot Day is as early as it was in 2019. And that's really kind of a little bit shocking for us because we thought we would have gained something, but somehow many of the gains we've lost again. So that's a bit of a problem. And so what can we say? The overall consumption actually is still a bit lower than in 2019, which in some ways is a good thing, but also biocapacity has been lower. So we lost on the biocapacity side, and consumption is a little bit lower. So overall, the ratio is about the same. But that's not the end of the story. That's the beginning of the story, because we can choose the future that we want. And so what we will do is, starting on Earth Overshoot Day, we will celebrate 100 days of possibility. And what we mean by that is that there's so many great things happening in the world. We just want to highlight some that we know of and show this is actually available. We could do so much better if we want to. We don't have to wait. Of course, there could be improvements in the future, but with all the great things we already have, we could do so much better. For example, bicycling more. I'm bicycling here. You can even see I have a trailer. Can you see the trailer in the back here?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
I can go shopping. I'll go shopping with my bicycle. I can go anywhere with my bicycle. I love my bicycle.
So, would you rather say that Corona right now, the COVID, whatever they call it, so it can be just another means for nature to fight, maybe because we have been so cruel to it?
I mean, on some ways, it doesn't have as direct an intention, obviously. But in any ecosystem, there's a noisy motorcycle now. But in any ecosystem, if there's imbalance, the ecosystem tries to establish balance again. Yes, I mean, by overusing ecosystems, then things happen that the resources may go down, more diseases may spread, etc. So COVID is a bit of a sign of imbalance. But we also could do much better. I think what COVID also teaches us is that we are actually biological. We are biological beings. And by being biological beings, we belong to ecosystems. And we are connected with each other. And by recognizing that we are biological, I think we start to recognize that taking care of our resources is really in our direct self-interest. There's no downside to it, because we often forget that. Many of us live in cities, and we forget how much we are connected to the ecological resources around us. Like Switzerland, for example, where I come from, uses 4.5 Switzerlands to support itself. But people don't realize that much because we live in cities and things are just available in the supermarket, so we forget how dependent we are on the planet.
That is one question from my side. 5th June, UNEP is launching this decade of restoration for 10 years.
Absolutely.
Do you think it's a great initiative, late, but maybe in time?
It's one of the big things we can do. We call it how to move the date. We use the hand. I should show the hand. Move the date. I just stop to show my hand. So the thumb shows how much we have, how much land we have. That's the restoration part. If we are more careful with our ecosystems, they can be healthier and more resilient, produce more. So that's really important. That's kind of the decade of restoration. At the same time, the other four fingers point towards how we can reduce our demand. So the first one is, how do we organize our cities? How do we build our houses? How dependent are we on cars and all these kind of things? The way we organize our cities and our buildings and everything is a huge factor. The second factor is, how do we power ourselves? Do we power ourselves with coal power or with solar power? It makes a big difference. And then how do we feed ourselves? Like about half the Earth's capacity already is occupied for producing food for people. And then the last one is how many we are. Obviously, if we are twice as many people, there's only half as much planet per person. So all these factors play a role together and determine eventually how well we can live on this planet.
So, sir, for the benefit of younger audience and the generation who will be watching our program, could you tell us a bit about the ecological footprint and the global footprint?
Yes. We started Global Footprint Network because we recognized that the really limiting factor, the bottleneck for humanity, but materially speaking, is not how much oil is underground, because there's a lot of it, but actually in the end, how much Earth can regenerate. And that also is, we compete for that. So we use that for food. So food is being regenerated, carrots and potatoes and cauliflower and all kinds of things, and grass for the animals. And then we also use regeneration to absorb the excess CO2 as we burn fossil fuels. We also use area that could be used for regeneration to build cities, which then also doesn't allow us to produce potatoes. So all these things compete for the Earth's ability to renew itself, or to regenerate, as we'd say. And so that's why we use that as the lens to look at the world, our glasses to look at the world, saying, wow, how much regeneration is needed for everything we do. And so we can compare that with also how much regeneration is available on the planet. And that happens on surfaces. So that's why the currency that we use, like a money currency, the currency that we use is actually a hectare that is adjusted. We call them global hectares. That means an average productive hectare becomes the reference. And so we can translate everything, like a whole country, like Switzerland, into how much productivity is in Switzerland, and express that in global hectares. And then we can compare that with how much do the Swiss consume, for example. So, and then you could say, how many Switzerlands does it take to support Switzerland? How many Indias does it take to support India? How many worlds, how many planet Earths does it take to support the world? So that's what we do. We do like accounting. Why is accounting important? It's like with money. If you just spend money and you have no idea how much you earn and how much you spend, it's quite dangerous, because you could easily run out of money, and that's dangerous. But if we do it with accounting, and you know more or less how your money situation is, then you can be safe. The same thing is with resources. If we just spend nilly-willy, wow, so much, then we don't actually understand how much being regrown. We can easily go ecologically bankrupt. That wouldn't be pretty. And actually, we are overspending. So it's possible to overspend because Earth is so rich. We can spend down some of its assets, like this deforestation. We can deplete soils. We can accumulate CO2 in the atmosphere. These are all ecological debts that we're accumulating, but we cannot do it forever. So for sure, what we know is there will be a regenerative future. The question is only, how quickly do we get there? If we get there very, very slowly, Then in the meantime, we'll have more climate change that will destroy more of the regeneration capacity. So that means there will be less ecological budget for us humans. Um, but of course, also we could go faster, which takes perhaps a little bit more effort in the short run, but it protects more of the regenerations. That means we'll be left with more regeneration, and we can live well. But eventually, there's nothing else to live from. We cannot always live off depletion. So eventually, we have to live off regeneration. So, so we think it's wiser to do it faster, because then also more budget is left. That's essentially our proposal. And the other proposal is to say, I think there's a misunderstanding. People think, yeah, we should be nice to the earth. But that somehow sounds like, wow, I have to make an effort and all the benefits go to the others. I'm not willing to do that much because all the efforts go somewhere else. But in reality, it's also important for me to be able to be sustainable, because what's happening is we're moving into a world where there will be more climate change and there will be more resource constraints. It's like a storm coming up on the horizon. And if a storm is coming on the horizon and you sit in a boat, you won't say, oh, I will not fix my boat. I will wait till everybody else is fixing their boat. And then maybe I will focus. So we have to make agreements on who is fixing their boat first. That's ridiculous. No, so you just have everybody, like, it's in their interest to kind of say, wow, can I get my boat ready? Maybe we can help each other too, fixing the boats. But certainly waiting for the others to fix their boat first, that's so absurd. And that's somehow how we're stuck mentally, that we think, wow, let's wait for the others. That's strange.
Okay, that is one question from my side. I mean, in last one decade at least, there has been a huge amount of effort from United Nations to the willing countries to NGOs, individuals, youth, everything. Despite all these efforts, the date is still shifting. It's not stopping there. It's still moving forward. I mean, we are consuming resources faster than we used to do before that. So do you think it is because of lack of or rising populations, or what could be the reason behind that? How to stop it or slow it down considerably?
Yeah, I mean, the world is like a big, massive ship that doesn't shift that quickly. And what is even, I think, more concerning, many don't think it's necessary to shift, or at least not necessary for them. They say, oh, yeah, maybe it would be good for the world, but why me? And that's the big misconception. I live in a city called Oakland, and we are very concerned about climate. But in a funny way, most people say, oh, we have to be nice to the planet, rather than saying, why is Oakland destroying Oakland? If we said that, we would be far more radical and say, wow, we cannot afford to do anything that doesn't make us safer in the future. And that would kind of then say, this is actually the economic priority number one, is to make sure that everything we do, all the investments we do, are aligned with the future that we want. So it's not just something nice that we do on Sunday afternoons. And I think that's kind of the biggest shift that is still needed. When we look at economic policies, I'm sure, I don't know how it is in India, or if you look at the World Economic Forum, the competitiveness studies, they just lack any physical dimension. They do kind of as if the economy was a separate thing, but we cannot be successful without it. We just produce actually a paper that in Nature Sustainability, and that's been actually quite well picked up. I'm quite happy about that. But still, I mean, it's just kind of contrasting this. Most of the development efforts still think we just have to generate more money and everything will be fine. But the reality is that 72% of the world population now, 72% live in countries that have both an ecological deficit. That means their consumption now, it already exceeds what their own ecosystems can renew. And they don't have the resources. I mean, you can overuse them for some time, but not forever. And they have less than world average income. That means on the global markets, they will not be able to outcompete others to get the extra resources. So they don't have the resources themselves, and they don't have the financial abilities to get it from somewhere else. So therefore, not focusing on resource security as the foundation to make sure is just insanity from my perspective. And that's kind of, if you look at development models and how we think countries need to develop, how international institutions about development talk about international development, talk about priorities, it seems to me we haven't recognized yet fully how central the environment is, a healthy environment, resource security, however we call it, to making prosperity last. Otherwise, anything else from my perspective would be anti-poor. If we are not taking care of ecosystems and of ecological integrity, and that we have enough ecological capacity to support the demand that we have, it's really anti-poor, because those with least financial resources, they will be even most put at risk, obviously. But also the cities. I mean, we build cities nilly-willy left and right, and we have the resources to support them. So if we construct things that it's like building bigger and bigger kitchens and not wondering like, will there be enough flour to come to the kitchen? You know, or I want to make bigger cakes, but is it a flour in the pantry to make the cakes? You know, so or oh, we want to fly further and further. We don't want to have a fuel gauge. But what if you don't have the fuel? What good is the plane if you don't have the fuel to fly the plane? You know, so I mean, it's an analogy, obviously, but that's kind of the surprise, that we have separated what we think is economic activities from the physical inputs that are needed to make them work. And so, but we still use them, just not in a wise way, and so we deplete our ability to have great futures.
Okay,
So I haven't
Mathis.
fully answered.
Okay,
I've already answered what
okay.
why is it, but I think it's still the mindset that we don't think it's important enough, because we could. The technologies exist. That's why we do 100 days of possibilities. There's so many examples what we can do if we wanted to. Maybe that what's limiting us most is that we continue to use the word should, because when we say should, we should do this, we should do that. What we actually say is it's not going to happen because it should. It's better to use the word I want. You know, I want this. I want this. I want to live in a city that doesn't need cars. That would be great. That's what I want. If I say, oh, we shouldn't have cars, then nothing happens.
Okay, Mathis, if you remember our last conversation, we drew an example from a mobile battery. Everybody owns a mobile phone, and the moment the battery depletes to 40%, 30%, we are immediately concerned. We know we have to recharge it, otherwise we are out of communication. That same thing doesn't happen with Earth resources. You have every single data on your website, every country wise, and what
Mm-hmm.
resources are there and how they have been consumed. And maybe it is rather crude way to put it, but I don't think there's any other way to put it, any other way. How do you think, if people in general nature, they do not do anything until it hits them personally, it impacts them individually? Even in corona times, they wouldn't wear a mask, but if somebody fell sick in the family or in immediate neighborhood, or there was something in the newspapers locally, they would immediately switch to wearing masks. So this
Mm-hmm.
ecological balancing, how, unless it hits or the people individually realize is hitting them directly, I don't think there'll be concrete actions. As you said just before, that it should and not I am doing this or I
Mm-hmm.
want this. So, what is the mechanism you think that can be? I mean, is there any way we can make it known that these impacts are known, reaches individuals? So there is going to be concrete action on the part of the individual, and we know that as countries, as governments, we can do a lot. But until individually people begin to feel responsible for things, they start taking actions, no matter how small it is, things won't change.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I find it very interesting. Like, I don't know if that's kosher to say, but we suffer from a colonial heritage that after World War II, when the colonial empire started to crumble finally, the colonialists felt very sheepish about it, and want to say, oh, we didn't come to exploit you, we wanted to bring civilization. Like, it's called the white man's burden. You know, it was just out of the goodness of our heart, we want to bring schools and railways to the world because that's what the world needed. And so the response kind of to hide that guilt that is still not discussed, the whole resource equation was taken out of economic development theory. So post World War II, resources have disappeared from the way we think. about economics. And so that's this colonial burden. And then we say, oh, we can always get it from somewhere else. So that's kind of in some ways a colonial thought. We just get it from somewhere else. Now there's one big culture that has built its own thinking that wasn't influenced by these colonial institutions, because still, like if you look at the leading universities, they come from these colonial places, and the ministers from South America, for example, they still go to Harvard and Chicago to learn about economic theory in the colonial mind frame. So another culture is China. I spoke with a young person who went to China to school. What did they learn there? In geography, they say resources are really important. They're really important and we need to look after them. And before we use our resources, let's use other places' resources. And I think, I mean, it may sound very crude, but on some level, I find that very healthy. Because if you think resources are so important that you need to look after them and rather use other people's resources than yours, if every country did that, we all would look after our resources. We would all be in a much more secure situation. But we still have the colonial disease that we think we can always get from somewhere else, that we shouldn't talk about resources just because we just rob others. And that leads to this crazy race where we just race for depletion. And it's insane. And so I think that's kind of, it's part of that same legacy. So the question of social justice and ecological integrity is very much interlinked. And the Chinese, because they didn't have, like, they kind of had to fight this colonial pressure, and were able to maintain their own cultures through that, um, um, have just thought about it quite differently.
As you already know, that ACT now is conducting a second conference, or a second edition of the same conference, which lasts for 24 hours. So do you think these conferences are good for nature and for the people?
I mean, absolutely. It's what we talk about. That's kind of in our presence, So the more we focus on what was important and talk about these things, the more likelihood there is that there will be attention. And I'm particularly thrilled. It's kind of a network of young people say we want to decide what we want, and gaining their voice. And so it's kind of learning how to talk about it and connect with each other and help each other and say, that's our agenda. That's what we want. And so that's how you build the muscle to say, I want this. And that's how we build the muscle to invite others and say, we need to do it together. Help us. And so it's great to build these networks and invite people in. So fantastic. I mean, it's not
Okay.
the end in itself. It's a necessary thing to talk with each other. And then we also have to do things.
So thank you again so much. And thank you, Pawnee, for being here today. And we hope to see you again soon enough. I'll be in touch through the
Thank you.
email.
Thank you. Be well.
Yeah, sure.
Congratulations and have a
Yes,
wonderful
sir.
event.